Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoy my video, please click the like button and share the video. It is the only way the YouTube algorithms really notices me. I will be very grateful to you. #HuntedGetaway. They thought they were safe. They were wrong. Scary story published by Scare Fiction. Read for you by Scare Fiction. Chapter 1. The Getaway. Alex gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles whitening as the city lights faded into the distance. Beside him, Jamie fiddled with the radio, cycling through static and country stations until he found a classic rock song. In the back seat, Sarah leaned against Mike, who was already cracking jokes to ease the tension. Nina, the newest addition to their group, stared out the window, her eyes tracing the passing trees. "Remind me again why we're driving to the middle of nowhere?" Jamie asked, half joking, half serious. "To get away from the grind," Alex replied, forcing a smile. "And because we all need a break." The highway soon gave way to winding roads that snaked through dense forest. Tall pines loomed over them, casting long shadows as the sun dipped below the horizon. The air turned cooler, and a heavy silence settled in, broken only by the crunch of gravel under the tires. "Here we are," Alex announced as they rounded a bend and the cabin came into view. It stood alone, surrounded by towering trees, its wooden exterior darkened with age and weather. Sarah stepped out first, stretching her legs. "It's perfect," she said, her voice echoing in the stillness. "Just what we needed." The group unloaded their bags, laughter and conversation masking the unease that Alex couldn't shake. He had picked this place for its seclusion, but now the isolation felt oppressive. As they settled in, night began to fall, the forest swallowing the last light of day. Inside the cabin, they found a rustic but cozy interior. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. They gathered in the living room, sharing stories and beers, but Alex's mind was elsewhere. He couldn't ignore the creeping sense of dread that had been building since they left the city. A sudden noise from outside made everyone freeze. It was a low, rustling sound, like something moving through the underbrush. Jamie shot Alex a look. "Did you hear that?" "Probably just an animal," Alex said, though he didn't believe it himself. Another rustle, closer this time. Mike stood, peering out the window into the pitch-black night. "Can't see a thing out there." Sarah tried to lighten the mood. "We're in the woods. There's bound to be wildlife." "Yeah, but it's creepy as hell," Jamie muttered, sitting back down. They decided to ignore it, hoping it was nothing. But the tension lingered, an unspoken fear hanging in the air. As they started to relax again, Alex noticed something on the cabin door. He walked over, squinting in the dim light. A piece of paper was pinned to the wood, fluttering slightly. He pulled it off and read the single word scrawled in red ink. Alex's heart pounded in his chest. He turned to the others, the note trembling in his hand. "Guys, we need to talk." The uneasy silence returned, heavier than before, as the group stared at the cryptic message. In the dim light of the cabin, the sense of foreboding grew stronger, and Alex couldn't shake the feeling that their getaway was about to become a nightmare. Chapter 2. Unease sets in. Alex's voice trembled as he held up the note for everyone to see. "Guys, we need to talk." Mike snatched it from his hand, laughing nervously. It's gotta be a joke. Someone probably left it here from the last trip." "Yeah," Sarah chimed in, though her voice lacked conviction. "Let's not freak out over nothing." Mina nodded, her eyes darting around the room. "Maybe it's just a prank." Alex forced a smile, trying to believe it himself. Right, a prank. They gathered around the fire again, but the easy camaraderie from before was gone. Silence stretched between them, only broken by the occasional crackle of burning wood. Outside, The night seemed to press against the windows, the forest an impenetrable black. As they settled in, Alex's mind drifted to the past. He'd been to this cabin before, years ago. A wild party, too much alcohol, and a reckless dare had led to a tragedy he'd buried deep. He glanced at Jamie, the only other person who knew. Jamie had promised to keep the secret, but now, with that note, it felt like the past was clawing its way back. A sudden noise broke his reverie, a rustling sound, louder than before, coming from the back of the cabin. Jamie stood, grabbing a flashlight. "I'm gonna check it out." "Are you sure?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide with concern. "Yeah, probably just a raccoon or something," Jamie replied, though he didn't sound convinced. He stepped outside, and the door creaked shut behind him. Minutes passed, each one stretching longer than the last. Alex stared at the door, willing Jamie to come back. The seconds ticked by, the silence inside the cabin growing heavier. Sarah and Mike exchanged worried glances, while Nina fidgeted with her phone, though there was no signal. "Shouldn't he be back by now?" Mike finally asked, breaking the silence. Alex stood, pacing. "I'll go look for him." "No," Sarah said sharply. "We should stick together." Another rustle, followed by a muffled thump. They all jumped, their nerves on edge. Alex's heart raced. He moved towards the door, but Sarah grabbed his arm. Just then, a distant scream pierced the night. Jamie's voice, filled with terror, echoing through the woods. They froze, the sound chilling them to their core. "Jamie!" Alex shouted, but there was no response. Panic set in as they argued about what to do next. "We can't just leave him out there," Mike yelled. "But what if it's dangerous?" Mina countered, her face pale. "We can't stay here and do nothing," Alex insisted, his mind racing with fear and guilt. The tension in the room was palpable, each of them grappling with their fear. The scream had shattered their fragile sense of security, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. As they stood there, uncertain and scared, the darkness outside seemed to grow thicker, more menacing. In that moment, Alex realized that their getaway was no longer a retreat but a trap, and the real horror was just beginning. Chapter 3: The Hunt Begins. Panic spread like wildfire among the group. Jamie's scream echoed in their minds, a haunting reminder of the danger lurking outside. "We need to find him," Alex said, his voice firm despite his racing heart. "We should stick together," Sarah argued, her eyes darting to the windows as if expecting something to burst through. Mike shook his head, already grabbing a flashlight. "We'll cover more ground if we split up. Alex and Sarah, you check the east side. Mina and I will go west." Reluctantly, they agreed, knowing time was against them. As they stepped outside, the forest swallowed them whole. Darkness pressed in from all sides, the trees towering like silent sentinels. The flashlight beams cut through the black, but only just. Alex and Sarah trudged through the underbrush, every rustle and snap of a twig sending their hearts into overdrive. The air was thick, with the scent of pine and damp earth. "Do you think he's okay?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "He has to be," Alex replied, though his conviction wavered. They walked in silence for a while, the tension between them growing as they navigated the claustrophobic forest. Finally, Sarah stopped, turning to face him. "Alex, there's something I need to know. What happened here before? You've been acting strange since we got here." Alex sighed, the weight of his past pressing down on him. "A few years ago, Jamie and I came here with some friends. There was an accident. A girl died. We didn't mean for it to happen, but it did. I've been trying to forget it ever since." Sarah's eyes widened, but before she could respond, a shout rang out from the west. "Help! Over here!" It was Mike. They ran towards the sound, branches whipping against their faces. When they found Mike, he was panting, eyes wide with terror. I saw something. Someone, a shadowy figure. It tried to grab me. Mina was shaking, clinging to Mike's arm. We need to get back to the cabin, now. They hurried back, the forest seeming more hostile with every step. When they finally reached the cabin, Alex's heart sank. Another note was pinned to the door. You can't escape. Inside, they barricaded the door and huddled together, the note a grim reminder of their predicament. Fear gnawed at them, the realization sinking in that whatever was out there wasn't just a figment of their imagination. We need a plan, Alex said, trying to sound confident. We can't let this thing pick us off, one by one. Sarah nodded, her hand finding his. We'll figure it out, together. The night stretched on, filled with whispered fears and unspoken regrets. The forest outside seemed to close in tighter, the shadows deepening. In the flickering firelight, the group clung to each other, their bond the only thing keeping the terror at bay. But as the darkness deepened, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the forest itself was alive with malevolent intent. And with every passing minute, Jamie's scream echoed louder in their minds, a chilling reminder that the true horror was only just beginning. Chapter 4. Secrets Unveiled. The fire crackled in the hearth, its light casting eerie shadows on the cabin walls. The oppressive silence hung thickly, broken only by the occasional creak of the cabin settling. The group huddled close, the latest note on the door still fresh in their minds. You can't escape. Tension rippled through the room. Mike turned to Alex, his eyes narrow with suspicion. You knew something about this place, didn't you? That's why you picked it. What aren't you telling us? Alex's face paled, and he hesitated, the weight of his secret pressing down. I didn't think it mattered anymore. Years ago, Jamie and I were here with friends. There was an accident. A girl died. We didn't mean for it to happen, but it did. We never told anyone. Sarah's eyes widened. And you thought bringing us here would be a good idea? Knowing what happened? Alex looked away, shame flooding his features. I thought it was in the past. But now, I don't know. Mina, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up, her voice calm but with an edge. So, we're dealing with a vengeful spirit or something? Because of what you did. Mike frowned, studying Mina. You've been acting strange since we got here. What do you know about all this? Mina's eyes flickered, and for a moment, she looked almost guilty. Nothing. I don't know anything. I just want to get out of here alive. Before they could press her further, a noise outside drew their attention. Sarah peered through the window, gasping. Guys, it's Jamie's hat. They rushed outside, finding Jamie's hat lying in the dirt, smeared with blood. The sight deepened their dread, a tangible reminder of the danger they were in. We need to find him, Alex said, his voice filled with urgency. We can't just leave him out there. They ventured back inside, the cabins creaking louder now, almost mocking. The walls seemed to close in, the air heavy with an oppressive weight. Every sound, every shadow felt like a threat. As they searched for any clue about what to do next, Mina stumbled upon a loose floorboard. Hey, there's something here. They pried it open, revealing a hidden room beneath the cabin. Descending into the darkness, they found themselves surrounded by disturbing artifacts, old photographs, journals, and symbols carved into the walls. The room reeked of decay and long-buried secrets. Alex's breath hitched as he recognized some of the items. These belonged to the girl who died. This was her family's cabin. The revelation hit them hard, the weight of the past crashing down like a tidal wave. The room's oppressive air, seemed to seep into their bones, the creaking of the cabin growing louder, almost as if the building itself was alive, mocking their attempts to escape. As they stood there, the darkness closing in, a chilling realization settled over them. Whatever was haunting them wasn't just seeking revenge. It was feeding off their fear, growing stronger with each passing moment. And in the shadows, they could almost hear a whisper, a voice from beyond, promising that their nightmare was far from over. Chapter 5. Descent into Madness. The hidden room's oppressive air clung to them as they climbed back up into the cabin, the artifact's sinister energy seeming to seep into their bones. The sense of dread was palpable, each of them on edge, eyes darting at shadows. "We need to get out of here," Mike said, his voice trembling. "This place is cursed." "We can't just leave Jamie," Alex argued, though his voice lacked conviction. Sarah stepped between them, her expression determined. "We have to stay calm. Fighting won't help us. We need to stick together and think this through." But it was easier said than done. As the night wore on, the cabin seemed to come alive with malevolent intent. They began to see things, dark figures flitting at the edge of their vision, whispers that weren't there. Paranoia set in, each of them questioning what was real and what was a product of their fear. "Did you hear that?" Nina whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "Someone's calling my name." "It's in your head," Alex said, though he wasn't sure if he believed it himself. Sarah tried to keep everyone grounded, her voice a calming presence amidst the chaos. "We're all scared. We need to focus on getting out of here." They decided to make a break for it, heading for the car. But when they reached it, Alex's heart sank. The engine wouldn't turn over, the battery dead. "Are you kidding me?" Mike shouted, slamming his fist against the hood. "We're trapped here." "We can't just sit here," Sarah said, her voice firm. "Mike, can you fix it?" Mike nodded, though he looked unsure. "I'll try." He grabbed a flashlight and some tools, heading outside. The rest of them waited anxiously, the forest around them eerily silent. Minutes stretched into eternity. A sudden scream tore through the night, sending them running outside. They found Mike sprawled on the ground, blood streaming from a gash on his leg. "It was there," he gasped, eyes wide with terror. "The thing. It attacked me." They dragged him back inside, his injury severe. Sarah did her best to tend to his wound, her hands shaking. "We need to stop the bleeding." Cabin creaked ominously, the walls seeming to close in. Suddenly, the lights flickered and then went out, plunging them into darkness. Panic surged through them, the oppressive blackness pressing in. Alex fumbled for his flashlight, the beam slicing through the dark to reveal their terrified faces. "We need to stay together," Sarah said, her voice trembling but strong. "We'll get through this." But as the cabin groaned and the shadows seemed to move, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching, waiting to pick them off one by one. The power outage was just the beginning, a harbinger of the horrors yet to come. In the suffocating darkness, the line between reality and madness blurred, and their fight for survival took on a new, terrifying urgency. Chapter 6. The Entity Revealed. The darkness was suffocating, wrapping around them like a living thing. Alex's flashlight beam flickered, casting jittery shadows across the cabin walls. The oppressive silence was broken only by Mike's labored breathing and the distant creaking of the old wood. Suddenly, a low, guttural growl emanated from the darkness. They froze, terror washing over them. "There's something here," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with fear. The flashlight flickered again, and in the brief moments of light, they saw it, a grotesque figure standing in the doorway. The entity was a twisted amalgamation of their deepest fears, its form shifting and contorting as if made of shadow and nightmare. Alex's heart pounded in his chest, but he knew he had to act. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice trembling but determined. The entity moved closer, its eyes glowing with malevolent intent. Alex stepped forward, raising the flashlight as if it were a weapon. "We're not afraid of you," he shouted, though his voice betrayed him. Sarah, ever the voice of reason, spoke up. "Alex, wait. I found something in that hidden room, something about the land and the entity. There might be a way to banish it." "What did you find?" Alex asked, his eyes never leaving the creature. "There's a link between the entity and the land. A ritual. We need to perform it at dawn to send it back," Sarah explained hurriedly. The entity snarled, advancing further. The group backed away, the oppressive atmosphere pressing down on them. As they huddled together, preparing for the final confrontation, Nina stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "Wait," she said softly. "There's something you need to know." All eyes turned to her, suspicion and confusion mingling in their gazes. Nina took a deep breath, her demeanor shifting. "I'm not who you think I am. I was sent here to ensure the entity's release. My real name is Evelyn, and I'm part of a cult that worships the entity." The revelation hit them like a punch to the gut. Alex felt the ground tilt beneath him. "What are you talking about?" Mina Evelyn smiled, a cold, calculating look in her eyes. "I've been guiding you here, preparing you for this moment. The entity feeds on fear and chaos, and you've provided plenty of both." Sarah's face paled. "You've been manipulating us this whole time?" Evelyn nodded. "And now, it's time for the final act." The entity roared, its form solidifying as if feeding off their collective horror. Alex's mind raced, the urgency of their situation crystal clear. "We can still do this," he said, turning to Sarah. "Tell us what we need to do." Evelyn laughed, a chilling sound. "You won't survive the night." But Alex refused to back down. With Sarah's knowledge and his determination, they might just have a chance. As the first light of dawn approached, they steeled themselves for the ritual, knowing that their lives and their sanity hung in the balance. The cabin groaned and the shadows danced, but Alex stood firm. This was their only shot, and he would do whatever it took to protect his friends and banish the entity once and for all. Chapter 7. The Final Confrontation. The first light of dawn barely penetrated the dense forest, casting long shadows that seemed to writhe and twist. Alex stood at the center of the cabin, his heart pounding as he laid out the final pieces of their plan. Sarah, Mike, and even Evelyn, formerly Nina, watched him, their faces etched with a mix of fear and determination. "We have one shot at this," Alex said, his voice steady despite the dread gnawing at him. "Sarah, you remember the ritual?" Sarah nodded, clutching a worn, ancient book they'd found in the hidden room. "We need to draw the symbols around the cabin and chant the incantation as the sun rises. The entity will be weakest then." Evelyn smirked, her earlier revelation still fresh in their minds. "You think you can outsmart it? It's been feeding on your fear, growing stronger." Ignoring her, Alex turned to Mike, who was pale and sweating from his injury, but resolute. "Mike, you need to hold out until we finish the ritual. Can you do that?" Mike gritted his teeth and nodded. "I'll do my best." The entity roared from the shadows, sensing their preparations. It lashed out, slamming into the cabin with a force that rattled the walls. They scattered, each taking up their position. Sarah began drawing the symbols with trembling hands, while Alex and Mike stood guard. The entity materialized, a grotesque figure of shifting shadows and glowing eyes. It lunged at Sarah, But Alex intercepted it, brandishing a makeshift torch. Stay away from her. The battle was fierce. The entity's strength was overwhelming, its form flickering with every blow. Alex fought with everything he had, his guilt and past mistakes fueling his determination. He could feel the weight of his actions, the lives lost and the lies told, pressing down on him. But he refused to let it break him. "Alex, behind you," Mike shouted, but it was too late. The entity struck, sending Alex sprawling. Pain radiated through his body, but he pushed himself up, his vision blurring. Evelyn watched, her expression conflicted. "You can't win," she hissed, but there was a hint of doubt in her voice. "We have to try," Alex shot back, his voice hoarse. "We're not letting this thing take any more lives." As the symbols glowed and the incantation reached its crescendo, the entity shrieked, its form destabilizing. It lunged one last time, aiming for Sarah, but Alex threw himself in its path. The impact was devastating. Alex felt a searing pain as the entity's darkness enveloped him. With a final, desperate effort, he thrust the torch into the heart of the shadow, channeling all his fear and guilt into one last act of defiance. The entity screamed, its form disintegrating in a burst of dark energy. Alex fell to the ground, his strength spent. Cabin shook, the walls creaking as the oppressive presence lifted. Sarah rushed to his side, tears streaming down her face. "Alex, stay with us." Evelyn watched, her smirk gone, replaced by a look of genuine remorse. "He did it," she murmured. "He actually did it." The dawn light filtered through the trees, bathing the cabin in a soft golden glow. The nightmare was over, but the cost was high. Alex's body lay still, the sacrifice that saved them all. As the others gathered around, their faces etched with grief and relief. The finality of the moment hit them. They had survived, but the scars would remain. And as the sun rose higher, they knew they would never be the same again. The horror had passed, but the memory would linger, a reminder of the darkness they had faced and the strength they had found within themselves. Chapter 8, Aftermath and Chilling Hint. The morning sun bathed the forest in a light that felt almost unreal after the horrors of the night. Cabin, now just a dark silhouette behind them, seemed smaller, less menacing in the daylight. Sarah led the way, her steps steady despite the weight of the night's events. Mike limped beside her, his face pale but determined. Evelyn trailed behind, her eyes downcast, her once haughty demeanor replaced with a subdued silence. The group moved slowly, each step away from the cabin, a step toward reclaiming their lives. They reached the car, and Sarah tried the engine once more. To their relief, it roared to life, the sound a beacon of hope in the stillness of the forest. They piled in, Sarah taking the driver's seat with a newfound authority. As they drove away, the weight of their ordeal hung heavy in the air. The road was bumpy, the silence punctuated only by the occasional sigh or groan of pain. They were battered and scarred, but alive. "We made it," Mike said finally, his voice a mix of relief and disbelief. Sarah nodded, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. "We did, but we lost so much." Her voice cracked, and for a moment, the tears she'd held back threatened to spill over. Evelyn, now Nina again, looked up, her expression one of guilt and sorrow. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never wanted it to end like this." Sarah glanced at her in the rearview mirror, her expression hardening. "We need to focus on getting back. We can deal with everything else later." They drove in silence, each lost in their thoughts. The events of the night replayed in their minds, the fear and the horror mingling with the grief of their losses. Alex's sacrifice weighed heavily on them all. a hero who had given everything to save them. As they neared the edge of the forest, the sense of relief grew stronger. Civilization was close, the nightmare seemingly behind them. But just as they were about to leave the forest, Sarah spotted something nailed to a tree beside the road. Another note. Her heart skipped a beat as she pulled over, the group's eyes fixed on the slip of paper fluttering in the breeze. She stepped out, her legs shaky, and grabbed the note. The words sent a chill down her spine. This isn't over. She turned to the others, her face pale. We're not done yet. Mike groaned. You've got to be kidding me. Mina shook her head, fear flashing in her eyes. What does it mean? Sarah crumpled the note in her hand, her jaw set. It means we need to be ready. Whatever we faced, it's not gone. They climbed back into the car, the weight of the note pressing on them. The road ahead was uncertain, the horror they'd faced a lingering shadow over their future. But as they drove away, Sarah's determination burned brighter. The forest receded behind them, but the message was clear. Their fight wasn't over. The entity, whatever it was, had not been fully vanquished. And somewhere, in the depths of the dark woods, it still lurked, waiting for its next chance to strike. As the car sped toward civilization, the survivors knew they had to be vigilant. The battle for their lives had been won, but the war was far from over. And with that chilling hint, the horror might continue, leaving readers on edge, wondering when the nightmare would return.